Good morning and welcome to the September meeting of the Community and Cultural Investment Subcommittee. This subcommittee focuses on our city's efforts around sustainability and recycling, our neighborhoods, parks, arts, libraries, education, and Head Start, and homelessness. I would like to call this meeting to order. Today's date is September 7, 2022, and the time is 10:06 a.m. We will start today's meeting with a call to the public, and we have a representative from the Law Department with us today to read a brief statement on the public comment section of this meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. During the call to the public, members of the public may address the subcommittee for up to 3 minutes on issues of interest or concern to them. The Arizona Open Meeting Law permits the subcommittee members to listen to the comments, but prohibits members from discussing or acting on the matters presented. During discussion on the agenda items, members of the public may speak for up to 2 minutes to comment on agenda items to be discussed. Comments must be related to the agenda item and the action being considered by the subcommittee. The subcommittee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters related to pending claims or litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will turn to staff for any public comments.
Our first speaker today is Rashida Worthy. Rashida, are you on the line? Doesn't look like Rashida is on the line. That's all we had.
Great. We will come back to public comment at the end of the meeting just to see if we are able to get her back on the phone. Thank you. Next, we will move to approve the minutes of our June subcommittee meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from June 1st, 2022?
Move to approve. Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Now we will move to the consent item on our agenda, items 2. This item is abandoned shopping carts retrieval services contract award recommendation. Is there a motion to approve item 2?
Move to approve. Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have item 3 for information only. That item is the Head Start Birth to 5 monthly report, July 2022. Would any of my colleagues like to hear information on this item? Thank you. And now we will now move to items 4 and 5, which are information and discussion items. Number 4, the 2020 Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Climate Action Plan update. We will begin with a presentation from Deputy City Manager Karen Peters and the Office of Environmental Programs.
Madam Chair, as they're making their way up here, we've got the 3 folks that are going to be addressing this item.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm Nancy Allen. I'm with the Office of Environmental Programs, and with me today is Dr. Matthew Potzler, also with the Office of Environmental Programs. And we're here today to talk about the 2020 greenhouse gas inventory for city operations and for our community level. With this new data, we hope to initiate an update to the most recent approved climate action plan from last fall. Global increase in GHG emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions, are a recognized driver of climate change. Measuring these emissions allow us to adequately plan and implement appropriate adaptation and mitigation strategies. Phoenix is on the front line from climate change. Heat, drought, and air quality are just a few of the challenges we deal with daily. With guidance from City Council, we have been preparing to meet these challenges for a while now. Actions addressing these impacts have been part of our daily work routines. The GHG inventory is just the most recent in a series of these inventories that the city has been carrying out for many years. With the approval of the 2021 Climate Action Plan in October, of last year, Phoenix confirmed its commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement and to being a leader in climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. I will now turn it over to Matthew to talk more about the greenhouse gas emissions inventory.
Madam Chair, Subcommittee members. So before we move on, I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is important to Phoenix. So on your screen, you can see that if there is no action, there'll be widespread climate change, and Phoenix will see increased summer temperatures and then less rain. Then I'll talk about a little bit the actual goals themselves for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and then our progress towards those goals. So we have two sets of greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. The first set is for municipal operations. So this is from all the services that the city provides, from lighting the facilities, from the fuel used in public transit, public works, and then from this disposal of waste, the emissions resulting from that. The next upcoming goal is a 40% decrease by 2025 from 2005 levels, and then after that in 2030 to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions from electricity use. The second set of goals is at the community scale. So these are all the activities from residents, businesses, industry, travel that produce greenhouse gas emissions. The upcoming goal is a 50% decrease by 2030, and then to be net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in alignment with the Paris Agreement. So now our progress towards municipal operations greenhouse gas emissions. These are measured in metric tons carbon dioxide equivalents. Our first inventory was conducted for calendar year 2005. Our most recent is for 2020. You can see that there's a decrease of 25% since 2005, primarily from reduced electricity use. And then we've also seen an increased fuel use due to commitments to projects like Transportation 2050 to provide public transit. The most impactful actions are energy efficiency upgrades that have resulted in 8% less electricity consumption since 2005, and that's from projects like the LED street lighting and energy efficiency projects at the convention center that you can see on your screen. And even though we're increasing fuel use as part of increased service, the transition to diesel D20 and then compressed natural gas from diesel has reduced the overall greenhouse gas intensity. Now for the community scale, these are again measured in metric tons and carbon dioxide equivalent. The graph is in millions of metric tons. It's separated into three sectors. Stationary energy is energy that's provided for residents in their homes to keep them cool. Also, again, for buildings, businesses, and that's in gray. Then we have transportation, so that's, again, from using fuels. Mostly in Phoenix comes from the use of gasoline, and then jet fuel, diesel. And then in blue is emissions from waste, disposal of waste, and then, again, wastewater treatment. Since 2012, we've seen a 14% decrease in emissions to now 2020, or the most recent inventory in 2020. And then we've seen an overall decrease of 23% in greenhouse gas emissions per resident. So even as the city has grown by 12% and the metro area economy has increased by 42%, we're still able to accomplish greenhouse gas reductions. The most impactful actions are having a less greenhouse gas intensive electricity grid due to closure of coal-fired power plants. For transportation, we did observe decreased commuting and travel in 2020. And then waste projects like the capture of biogas at 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plants achieved those reductions. And then a little bit about the electricity and greenhouse gas emissions. So electricity is 35% less greenhouse gas intensive since 2005, and so this is what's really driving our reductions. That's because we're using less coal, there's more natural gas being used, and then more solar. And then some of the projects that would help the city accomplish its goals are like the one you see on your screen for aviation headquarters. So these are solar panels on employee parking lot. And then in the background, you can see Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. And then a little bit about how transportation influenced COVID, or how transportation was influenced by COVID-19. Initially, at the beginning of the year, traffic did decrease, but then by the end of the year, returned to normal. We did see that heavy truck traffic from deliveries increased, and that has stayed elevated ever since. And then also air travel was impacted by COVID-19. So now that we have all this information from the greenhouse gas inventories, we plan to start the action plan update. So the city committed to updating the plan every 2 years. So we'll take these inventories, we'll take updated modeling at the community scale, and then at the municipal operations. We'll include new projects, programs, processes, and then we'll also be reviewing and updating existing goals and creating milestones for long-term goals. This is our proposed timeline for the update. So beginning shortly, we'll reach out to city departments for updates on the plan. We'll produce a document for community input this winter. We'll go out for community input in spring, extensive outreach again through surveys, workshops, presentations. And then by summer, create a draft to that update. Again, go back out to community once it's in one package. Produce a final plan by fall, and then come back to City Council for the consideration of the plan by the end of the year. And then now back to Nancy.
So in summary, our greenhouse gas emissions have decreased both for our municipal operations and for our community level. Our investments in energy conservation and other adaptations to reduce our emissions are proving to be impactful. The COVID-19 pandemic actually did lead to some reductions and have left us with some fantastic new tools such as the telework program. And we are exploring the possibility of coupling our update to our climate action plan along with the general plan, which offers some exciting opportunities. And then lastly but not least, the aviation department is putting the final flourishes on their roadmap to net zero carbon. They are also expected to reach a level 4 of the airport carbon accreditation. This accreditation is global and it is airport specific. So look for this coming to you from the aviation department in the near future. Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. And before we go to comments from my colleagues and questions, do we have anyone from the public to speak on this item?
We have one speaker today, Joshua Shimkis from Upper Council Chambers. Doesn't look like he's here. All right, that's all we had.
Great. Okay, we'll see if she, once we're done with questions, if she comes in. Okay, so any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilwoman Ansari.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you everyone so much. Really want to commend you on this comprehensive report. It's obviously incredibly detailed. It was a couple hours of homework for me last night, and I think it's really amazing to see, first of all, I think the trajectory that Phoenix has come from, reading the history of how we started in 2008 and the goals that were set just for city operations, and that 5% reduction goal and how we were able to exceed that and come a long way, I think is incredible. We've clearly done a lot of work to improve our energy reduction when it comes to buildings and streetlights and everything else. And I know it's just the beginning, especially since we have so much access now to funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, from the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm very excited to see how we use this GHG impact study to move forward. But I do have a number of questions, and the questions are sort of they go with the report. So I'll start with attachment A. So I'm wondering, out of the climate action projects completed by the city, which projects, if you could just remind us, resulted in the largest reduction in overall GHG emissions, and similarly, which of the currently planned or commenced projects would result in the largest reduction moving forward?
Madam Chair, Subcommittee, Ansari. The largest project so far for municipal operations or in community in general?
You can separate it out if that's
okay.
helpful.
For municipal operations, it's mostly the energy efficiency projects.
Okay.
Those are a good enhancement. Most of the emissions from the city do come from the use of electricity. So anything we can do towards reducing energy use and more access to renewable energy sources would be an improvement. For transportation, the transition to alternative fuels has made a big impact. says the fleet can be either further transitioned or there's now work to look towards electric vehicles. So anything we can do to add electric vehicles to the fleet would be a benefit.
Okay, so when it comes to moving forward in the next iteration of our climate action plan, is there a way that we can prioritize in the next version of it those actions that we've seen the largest impact from? And obviously transportation, it's hard to miss in those graphs. Yes, we are making reductions when it comes to our buildings, but transportation, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, probably would have been increased, if anything. So we know that 2022 probably won't.
So the graph you're referring to is for the community scale, and so that would be the biggest, again, reductions were from renewable energy. The biggest improvements there, so that's for travel, would be for every resident.
Right.
So then the greatest improvement there, what's in the plan, is the transition to electric vehicles, to have 50% of sales by 2030, and that would mean roughly 20% of all electric vehicles in the city of Phoenix would be electric. So that would be the greatest point of investment we could make probably as a city. Right now we're depending on utilities, electric utilities, to make those decreases and greenhouse gas reduction at the community scale.
Okay, and a follow-up to that, it says in that section of the report that and this is the quote, policy will be developed to work towards procuring lower GHG emission vehicles where operationally feasible, including electric vehicles. And I'm wondering if we have a due date or timeline for that policy to be developed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari. Exactly, the plan that was adopted by the Council, the Transportation Electrification Action Plan, details how that transition is going to happen, specifically as we start that transition over the next 5 years. So those are the actions that have been identified, and we do have an internal working group looking at where we get the most return on investment for both investment in new vehicles, but also investment in charging infrastructure that must accompany that. So that is ongoing. We'll have an update for this subcommittee in the near future.
Okay, great, and that's helpful. I was going to bring up the internal steering committee. So do you think in this calendar year we'll be able to hear an update on how that is going?
Yes, indeed. So this subcommittee will be hearing a report from Public Works later in the year about our vehicle electrification plans. So we would absolutely incorporate the status of the steering committee work.
Okay, great. And then I'm wondering, so on page 6 of attachment A, we know that the biggest contributor to emissions from city operations is from fleet fuels. Do we have data on which department is causing the most of this or contributing to the most, and does that line up which departments are most ready to electrify?
Madam Chair, Subcommittee, I'm sorry. The two largest departments are public transit and public works, use the most fuel.
Okay.
But the fleet all falls under public works, so that's how that's classified. What we are seeing is an increase in fuel use in public transit. As again, what I mentioned with the Transportation 2050, as service miles increase, you need more fuel. And so now with the grants, like the green bus grants, electric vehicle, they're exploring those options to see the transition to those either zero emissions buses, those kind of things. So that would be, again, the biggest benefit to look at those kind of vehicles.
The public transit as far as public works, and then I assume police and fire fall somewhere later
They
down
would
the
fall
list.
right, they would fall under the public works category in our inventory.
Got it. Well, that's good. I think all of these questions are really just to show, I think, and all the data shows us that we really need to focus on the transportation sector. Obviously, that is making up the bulk of our greenhouse gas emissions. I can't anticipate, I'm not going to guess what 2022's results will show us, but I think with the pandemic, not being over, but people kind of resuming their normal lives, and if that was really the main reason we saw a fall in 2020, then I think if there's a way in our 2020 our next climate action planning to really focus on transportation as a priority, especially when it comes to our own city fleet where we have the most control, that is what I would like to see. I really look forward, Karen, to hearing the internal steering committee, because I think making sure that the entire cities on the same page in all of our departments. You know, I personally was slightly disappointed, for example, when, you know, we're working to get the CAP program up and running, all of these, you know, new vehicles were purchased without even considering electric. So I think we all need to be thinking on that line for anything new that's purchased, of course, if we're going to make a dent next time. But ultimately, I think this is great. It's really phenomenal to see the just kind of intense research that we're doing and the data gathering that we're doing, and I appreciate all of your hard work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. Councilwoman Stark, sorry.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about telecommuting, and I'm curious. I know during the pandemic, everyone was working from home. Are there plans to continue to allow staff to work from home just to help with the transportation issues?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Stark. So actually, OEP, Environmental Programs, has been working closely with HR over the course of a few years now to work toward the teleworking policy of the city. And so, and in fact, Deputy City Manager Inger Erickson is working through the details of how that would continue after the pandemic. And so perhaps Inger could provide more details than I can.
Madam Chair and Member Stark, indeed, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be solidifying that policy. And again, we're not going to be taking away what is already existing. In fact, we'll probably be enhancing the opportunity.
Thank you. And then I'm also curious about data collection with regards to the private sector. For example, my daughter's boyfriend used to work in an office, and then during the pandemic, they found it was a lot cheaper to let everyone work from home rather than lease office space. Do we have any information on what the private sector has been doing? I mean, they're not going back to the office. They have really saved a tremendous amount of money, and I'm just curious, have we collected that kind of data as well?
So, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Stark, as it pertains to greenhouse gas emissions, that is really the data that is used for these inventories is power use in buildings. And so the transition from the office to home and back to the office, we'll see that from a greenhouse gas emissions inventory in terms of energy consumption. I think it's an excellent question, and we should dive into it a little deeper, but in terms of the data that we have, we don't have anything specific that I'm aware of.
We don't, but the county requires the trip reduction program. So any employers in the area that have over 50 employees are required to do the trip reduction, and many of them do have teleworking as part of their program. And I know that the county is interested in looking at this type of data. I just don't think they've got it at a publicly consumable point right now, but they do these kind of studies and run these kind of reports to see what the impact of some of these actions are. So we could have that, and in fact, we could probably make a request for the county to give us an overview of what that looks like.
Thank you. I'd be interested in that. I, too, agree with Councilwoman. Transportation is probably the key issue, and we really need to address that. One of the things I hope we keep in the back of our mind, we've always relied on HERF funding in the past to keep our roads paved. So hopefully, as we move forward towards electric, we look at other funding mechanisms to help, because we're still going to need our roads. And I know that we work closely with our InterGov on that, but hopefully we can have those kinds of dialogues with our legislature. So thank you. Great work. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and I think thanks for the report. I think as we talk through solutions and maybe critiques, the work to solve this is not on your shoulders. It's for you to bring it up to us, and I think for us moving forward is the policies to make sure that we're doing the right things. We are the hottest major city in the world. We broke a record last year with 338 deaths, and we're upwards of 500 now. And so any other climate crisis that would amount to those many deaths, we would be taking a lot more serious. And so I do feel like we do need to step it up, and not just in this area, but overall, and making sure we do things, because we literally have folks dying. Some of the concerns I have is a lot of the reductions came from the pandemic, right? And so even with those reductions, we still have 14.8% to reach our goal for 2025. And with skewed numbers, I have concerns that we will get there, or that, things may rise. Teleworking or whatever other lessons I think we learned from the pandemic would be good to incorporate and figure out how to be helpful. I do think we need to prepare for future population. Obviously, we continue to be also the fastest growing city, along with the hottest city. And I think where we're going here is leading by example is going to be the key, whether it's transportation, whether it is, as a city, we need to take on that mantle and make sure that we're doing right, and we're showing private sector, we're showing others what can be done. So for some of our buildings, we've dropped greenhouse gases, but we've also reduced our square footage by 40%. So I'm not sure if that's, making sense. Regardless, not making sense, but are we actually dropping, or are we just using less square footage as a city? I think that was a little confusing, so that's a semi-question. But the real question is, we have the ability, for example, with 100 West Washington, a building we just acquired, we're about to develop. Have we incorporated new standards or expectations for new buildings? And especially that one that is fresh on our minds. I think we're about to vote later on today to get moving on that project. And I guess the question is there new standards, or is there a possibility to make that building the next example of what we want buildings to look like in the city?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Garcia, I think that's an important dialogue for us to have, and as we go forward with 100 West Washington, we need to look hard at the prior energy consumption and prior water consumption, so that we can approach the build-out with that in mind. Absolutely. We'll look hard at that, but I can't speak to any of the details right this minute.
Okay. I think that would be good. We have an opportunity to actually measure what it was doing, and we're going to rebuild the whole thing, so we'll be able to measure impacts of whatever new technology is out there. I see the Climate Action Plan as a live document. As new technology comes out, as we're able to electrify our fleets, as we're able to do different things, just encourage that we do that. I think obviously electrifying the fleet is important, but also I would like to see the difference between obviously public transportation and car use. And so our office, I think some other folks have been proponents of free public transportation, or just really encouraging folks. That's something that happened during the pandemic. Is that something we could do as a city to moving forward? Obviously, continuing to encourage bike and pedestrian. Later on in the day, we're going to be speaking to our road safety plan. So I just, final thing I say is, I think all of these intersect with all the different plans and all the work we're doing. And so just like Climate Action Plan, I think obviously this report, how do we have this interact with everything else we're doing as a city, I think is how we put it in the forefront and address this crisis. So thank you all.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ansari?
Thank you. Just a few more questions. I also am very interested in the impact of land use, and Nancy mentioned that we were exploring the possibility of the climate plan and the general plan. Something that I don't think we've done, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I would really like to see is what is the impact of sprawl in our city and how we're building. Obviously, we know that building outward is, putting a strain on our use on electricity and water, et cetera. So I'm wondering if that's been something that has been discussed at all in terms of something that we are able to study if we've done that, and if not, do we have plans for the future?
I don't know that we've actually done that as its own study. We do recognize that we are very spread out, which is why transportation is such a challenge for us. You look at some other cities and their per capita GHGs, it's much lower because they're much more dense cities and they don't have the same transportation that we have. I don't think that we have anything that addresses that directly. We could look into that.
Okay.
And I would just add that that's why it's very exciting and important that we're going to be coordinating the update of the Climate Action Plan with the update of the general plan so that those things can be considered together.
Okay. That's great. I think from my end, I would support that 100%. I mean, it makes no sense how we're building in the city of Phoenix. We should be building much more centrally in a dense manner. You know, continuing to build out is not at all aligned with our climate goals. And as Councilmember Garcia said, I mean, I feel like a broken record in my life saying this, but the climate crisis is the biggest challenge of our time. I mean, a third of the country of Pakistan is underwater. Hundreds of people die here every single year. And I think what we see from all of the different disasters around the world is that there's nobody that comes to save you and nobody's there to help. And so it is up to us as a city to make sure that we are prepared and doing everything we can. So I hope, I was very excited that you said we're exploring the general plan, climate plan cohesion, because I think, it can't just be that climate is happening in a vacuum. It's an all-encompassing issue. It's economic. It has to do with security, health, all of the rest. So would like to see that. So looking forward to working with you. The other question I had was just around the fact that obviously you showed that some of our GHG emissions fell due to the grid and the fact that we're moving away from coal and all of the rest. What is our city doing to advocate at the state level with the utilities, at the Corporation Commission, to advocate for a quicker transition to renewable energy? And can we be doing more?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari. I would say that the council can help us in advocating at the state and Corporation Commission level. We are not directly engaging there. However, we are directly engaging with the utilities. And you may remember that we have MOUs with each of the utilities that serve the city, SRP and APS, where we work through sustainability issues generally. Some staff at the city serve on advisory committees to the utilities to help them think through their sustainability goals and their resource planning efforts. So that's where we have engaged at a staff level, and I would encourage, to the extent that the council would like us to weigh in at the state or the Corporation Commission, that we would be very open to that direction and jump on that.
Okay. Again, from my end, I think that's absolutely yes. I think one example that comes to mind from this past year is the SRP effort to expand in Coolidge and build, a new site there. And obviously they were, thank God, voted down multiple times by the Corporation Commission. But I personally went and called into those board meetings and spoke out against it, but I didn't see it happening really cohesively as a city when obviously we need all hands on deck when it comes to our utilities stepping up and focusing on renewable energy as opposed to building new gas-powered fire plants. So I would love to see more advocacy from the city level and more, just more strong leadership, because we are the largest city in the state, one of the largest in the country, and I think we have, if we speak up, it is powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing I think I would add to everything that everyone has said, I think that we always have to look at these plans as from a comprehensive approach. I think you guys hear me say that a lot. And here, I mean that from the area of, if we are looking into transportation, if we're electrifying our fleets, how do we make sure that at the same time we are training our mechanics and we're putting our current mechanics through the process as well, so they are able to learn how to do these new jobs. I think that we need to be thinking about the amazing jobs that this actually will create for us, and how is it that we bring those jobs in and that we don't subcontract out. I think that as we're moving forward with a lot of this, I think everyone knows how I feel about subcontracting and how do we need to make sure that these are good jobs within the city. I think that's incredibly important. And the other piece of that is seeing how is it that other cities are doing their bike lanes, and how is it that other cities are doing their bus stops, and how do we make our bus stops and our bike lanes safe for folks to want to be able to travel in these areas, and making sure that you guys are working with the different departments within the city to making sure that we're working with each other and that we're supporting each other in terms of making a lot of this happen. As we continue to better our bus stops and we better our bike lanes, then I think that will give people the opportunity and the wanting to be able to use more of public transportation. I think that's important, and making sure that we're looking at the jobs and that we're looking at this more as a comprehensive approach as we are going into these different plans. I think everything's exciting and I think it's great, but I think this is going to take all the different departments working together and making sure that we're talking to each other so we can make these plans happen. With that, are there any other comments? Great. Well, thank you guys so much for this. And now we're going to move to item 5, an update on a drought management plan and water conservation efforts. We will begin with Deputy City Managers Karen Peters and Alan Stevenson in the Water Services and Planning and Development Departments.
And happy birthday to Josh.
Josh, you and Michael Angulo have the same birthday, I guess.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Yes, we are here today to talk about some more weighty issues, Colorado River shortage and drought management plan, and how we go forward in light of the issues that we're facing. So with me today, as you mentioned, of course, is Deputy City Manager Alan Stevenson. To his left, our Water Resource Management Advisor, Cynthia Campbell, Water Services Director, Troy Hayes, and Assistant Planning Director, Josh Bednarik. Happy birthday, Josh. So with that, I'll turn it over to our team.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Cynthia Campbell. I'm the Water Resource Management Advisor, and I think I need a clicker. There we go. And I'm going to start our presentation this morning about the Colorado River Shortage and Drought Management Plan. Just as we go through this every time, but just to update for perspective, the Phoenix water supply, the water that we actually use in any given year, approximately 60%, just under 60%, comes from the Salt and Verde rivers, which are unaffected currently by shortage or drought. 40% of our supply comes from the Colorado River, which most certainly is affected by shortage and drought. And approximately 2% of our water supply comes from groundwater. Now, again, this is not a reflection of what is in our water resource portfolio, but rather how we use it. We have a lot more groundwater available. We choose not to use it because it is a finite supply and it is our foundational supply. So, as you know, if you've turned on the television or heard the radio anytime recently, the Colorado River is in decline. We're seeing the driest conditions in over 1,200 years in the Colorado River. Lake Mead, our reservoir there at Hoover Dam, is at 28% of capacity. Lake Powell, above it, is at 26% of capacity and may be approximately 30 feet from dead pool conditions. In dead pool conditions, it's not possible to physically move water over the dam because the water levels are so low, the hydraulics can't lift it. So for next year, the Bureau of Reclamation has declared a Tier 2A shortage, which is a greater shortage than we're currently in at Tier 1, but probably not enough to meet the requirements that they have set for themselves as to reducing demand in the Colorado River in order to prevent dead pool. The other thing I want to show for context in this conversation is our history of water conservation in Phoenix. So this is a graph we use a lot, but I'll explain it again. It's the blue bars represent our population. And as you can see, our population has steadily increased since 1990 with over 400,000 additional residents. The green line that you see is our residential gallons per capita per day water use consumption. And as you can see, that has steadily gone down even as our population has gone up. We have seen our water use per capita go down 30% in the last 20 years. It is a trend that continues. And so we're very proud of that. And we think that reflects well on what we like to call our culture of conservation with our customers. So I want to show you, this is just another visual representation of what that means when you start talking about reducing the GPCD the way we have. So these two pictures are colored versions of a quarter section in North Phoenix. And you can see on the left the 2007. So green basically represents grass or turf or other lush vegetation. The greener it is, the more grass there is. And so you can see the same exact quarter section in 2013, and the brown color represents more xeriscape, desert adapted plants. And you can see that our residents have made this change. And so the next one I want to show you too, in fact, to talk specifically about grass, since the 1970s, residential use of grass has gone down dramatically. What we saw in the 1970s was approximately 80% of the residential properties in the city of Phoenix were what we would call majority turf. And majority turf is probably best defined as, grass in the front yard, grass in the backyard, a lot of mature landscaping. You also might obviously recognize that in the 1970s, the city of Phoenix was probably, most of its residential properties were in the central part of the city. And so that was 80% majority turf. Today, that number is less than 10%. So less than 10% of the residential properties in the city of Phoenix have what we would call majority turf, more than 35% of the landmass covered in grass or lush vegetation. That has come without any incentives, without any buybacks, simply because our customers understand. It also has come in some part because of a rate trigger that raises the rates in the summer. So if you want to have grass, you're going to pay more for water for that. I also want to demonstrate, a lot of people talk about water conservation and they focus on the city efforts, and that's very important. But also what we have seen in the state of Arizona since 1980 is a very concerted regional collaboration. And it started with the 1980 Groundwater Management Act passed by the state of Arizona. In that act, the Department of Water Resources was established, and it also established for each city in the urban areas water use targets for that GPCD, that gallons per capita per day. So every year or every 5 years in management plans, the Department of Water Resources establishes a goal for the city of Phoenix for its GPCD. And the city of Phoenix has always not only met that goal, but far exceeded it. That is, we're very much lower than the GPCD established by DWR. We also have requirements for water loss in the utility, how much our pipes are allowed to leak. It's under 10%, and we have maintained that. We have assured water supply requirements. We have irrigation limitations. So you can't grow grass on public medians in the right-of-way since 1980. That's something that our friends in our nearby states are just now starting to adopt and getting a lot of media coverage for it, I would add. There's also been prohibitions on the use of non-native plants and artificial water bodies as part of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. So that is a regional effort, an example of it. Another example of regional collaboration is Water Use It Wisely, which is a collaboration of cities that put together a program to message water conservation. Phoenix was a founding member of Water Use It Wisely in 1999, and it has significant media presence. Most notably, if you've been in Phoenix for a while, you've seen the 100 water-saving tips, 100 ways to serve water. And at this point in time, over 30 Arizona water utilities and organizations are members of Water Use It Wisely. And then finally, I would give as an example of regional collaboration the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, or AMWA, which again, Phoenix was a founding member of AMWA. AMWA does a yeoman's job, frankly, in putting out water conservation materials for the general public. including plants for the Arizona desert, this find and fix leaks document that you see here pictured. And they also have a Smartscape training program for landscape professionals that tries to teach our landscapers what's the appropriate way to use water, what low water use plants are desirable, and how much water they actually should use. So AMWA does that quite a bit, and of course, again, we are a founding member of AMWA. And with that, I'll turn it over to Troy Hayes, our Water Services Director.
Thanks, Cindy. In 1990, the Water Services Department completed its first drought management plan. The City of Phoenix Drought Management Plan is generally outlined with 4 stages ranging from a Stage 1 water alert where an insufficient supply situation appears likely, all the way to a Stage 4 water crisis. The City of Phoenix has an ordinance to authorize the drought plan and the Phoenix Code that authorizes the Water Services Director to determine whether implementation of the drought plan is necessary and to determine the appropriate stage of action. And currently, as we've highlighted here, we are currently in the Stage 1 water alert area. Following the Stage 1 water alert declaration, at this subcommittee in June, staff issued a news release which resulted in extensive media coverage by our local media stations. This was also kickoff of our public outreach and education program, starting with Water Conservation Media Day, where reporters were invited to meet with city subject matter experts and to see simple to implement water conservation tools that would help the average homeowner use less water. The department followed that up with a communication in all formats, including direct mailers, billboards, and other things that we've done. Staff has also developed a water usage insert for our residential customers. The bill insert will show individuals' water use over a 3-month period compared to an average household across the city and within their zip code. For the ease of this presentation, we're only showing 1 month as we've represented here. The intent is to send this communication quarterly to all of our customers in their city services bill beginning sometime in October. We will also include information about the city's overall water usage and simple strategies for reducing their water use. Since the declaration of the Stage 1 water alert, the Water Services Department has significantly increased the outreach and education activities. There are 2 programs in particular that we would like to highlight. In July and August, the Water Conservation Team hosted a second session of the Water Wranglers. This 4-week curriculum trains community members in areas of water resources, water and wastewater treatment, utility operations, and customer service. After completing the training, graduates can then help the city at water-related community events. We observed significant increases in interest in this program since the declaration, and we graduated 15 Wranglers in our last session. Second, in collaboration with the Green Team, the Water Service Department has launched a Water Bag, a seminar series targeting city employees. Sessions will better help employees understand drought, water resources, and how they can conserve and work at home. The first of these sessions were hosted in July, where over 200 employees learned the basics of Water 101. And so what we did with this program is kind of reverse engineered it. We've been out in the community talking with the community constituents about how they use water resources, how they can do things at home. But what the thought was is to bring that internally to create advocates and better educated customers within our employees. In additional outreach and education programs, our water conservation team is developing and implementing programs and projects that directly reduce water use. We've seen broad success with these programs with the Phase 2 Ad Hoc Water Conservation Committee plan nearing completion and the Phase 3 underway. Our program characterizes the success that we've seen in this area is our HOA Efficiency Checkup program. This program was relaunched in the spring of 22 and aims to help HOAs reduce their water use by watering their landscapes with more efficiency. The program has identified more than 75 million gallons of potential annual water savings in just the first 8 months. By continuing investment in these programs, the Water Services Department will continue to lead the city towards its goal of reducing its water use. And now I'll turn the presentation over to the Assistant Planning and Development Director, Josh Bederick.
Thank you, Troy. Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, as Troy and Cynthia have highlighted, Phoenix has long been a leader when it comes to water conservation and management. As we look to continue as a great steward of this precious resource, an integral part of our effort will be to take a comprehensive approach regarding how and where our water resources are utilized for new development across the city. This approach falls into three general areas. First, an update of our policies and standards to ensure new development is as efficient with water as possible and to reinforce our commitment to building the sustainable desert city. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the subsequent slide. Second, an update of our policies regarding the annexation of properties outside of our water service area. And third, the development of a process to evaluate large water users looking to locate within the city to ensure that the proposed use provides a sufficient benefit to the city and the area in question has the necessary water service capacity, excuse me.
Madam Chair,
So just to expand a little bit,
Sorry, Josh.
could you define what a large water user is? Thank you.
Councilwoman Stark, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Stark, a large water user, as we are discussing and proposing, is usually a water user that uses between 250,000 and 500,000 gallons per day.
so as I mentioned, I'll go into a little bit more detail when we talk about the new development standards that we're going to be focused on. As growth occurs, strengthening these standards will ensure that new development in Phoenix responds to this moment and positions us for continued growth. We've identified several areas of emphasis for this efficiency. First will be the development of or participation in a water efficiency certification program that could be administered by a third party. The program will establish updated efficiency standards for everything from fixtures and irrigation components and provide a framework for accountability and compliance. The next two areas really focus on our landscaping standards. The Sonoran Desert is a unique and beautiful landscape to build a city. Reinforcing this landscape in future development will be another area of focus of this effort. By emphasizing the utilization of native and drought-tolerant vegetation, we can make development in Phoenix even more water efficient and reinforce the unique character of our Sonoran Desert setting. Coupled with that is a consideration for restrictions on vegetation like turf that require significant watering. Decreasing the amount of turf in new development in areas such as passive open space and landscape setbacks will significantly reduce water demand and provide additional space for more efficient landscaping. Lastly, we'll be evaluating all of our processes and policies, codes, and ordinances to ensure that they align with creating water-efficient development. Updating these standards will provide us an opportunity to collaborate as a community. We'll be reaching out to a host of stakeholders to collaborate on this effort, and we'll return this fall with a draft policy and recommendations. We look forward to working with you and the community on this endeavor. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, this concludes our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation on this very key issue. Any questions, comments? Councilmember Garcia?
Thank you. Excited about the community engagement piece. I think it's the problem could be a little scary, but I think the seriousness, calls for us to engage these folks. The Water Wrangler program seems really cool. I like the idea, I like the concept. I think figuring out how we invest in it. I think of, when I'm thinking about it, I think about community health workers and what those associations kind of look like. And again, it's similar to the conversation we just had about climate action. I think it's very connected. So wonder if there's any thoughts on how to expand that. I know we have programs such as Block Watch and others that actually have funding that folks can apply to do things. Wonder if there's any plans on how to increase participation or grow that program.
Madam Chair, Councilman Garcia, one of the things that we'd like to do with Water Wranglers, whether it be this fall or the session after that, because right now we're on target to do about 2 sessions a year, maybe 3, but we definitely want to expand it so there's parallel Spanish-speaking Water Wrangler program going on at the same time. So we'd run 2 programs concurrently each time we're running it. So that's one way to expand it. The other way is that water conservation staff is looking at concrete ways of how to use the water wranglers that have already been trained to help us out at community events. Also, potentially, that could prop them up if they're prepared for that, if that's something that they would like to do for presentations to community groups. These would be the kinds of presentations that we currently don't have the staff to do, although right now we are doing a lot of those presentations, and we are soliciting folks who want to have water conservation conversations to contact us, and we're pretty much going out to anybody who's asking. So, you know, but having additional water wranglers who are conversant on that would be very helpful. So that's one of the things. Also, a lot of community events we frequently go to on weekends and things like that, home shows and things, it would be very helpful to have additional bodies there to help us with those efforts, hand out literature, answer basic questions, and refer people to the experts if their questions are more difficult. So those are all ways that we anticipate using the Water Wrangler program in the future.
Thank you. One other thing I wanted to mark is I think just expanding on the knowledge of the water systems in the city. Obviously, we're lucky to have built the city upon the OTAM and PIMA folks who have taught us how to kind of water bend, and then obviously the Sanjeros who grew our canal system. I think it's very important, and I think connecting folks, obviously the front of our building, not many people know that our city hall has or alludes to that culture, so I think it's really important to remember that and where we sit historically. In regards to where we're at in this kind of stage, what are the level of like volunteer, you know, we're asking folks to do things for themselves. So what's the level of success that we would need from these volunteer programs for us to not go into the next stage?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, and I think Cindy can expand upon that. As you alluded to, Councilman Garcia, is right now we're asking our customers to go back and voluntarily look at how they use water and what's the best and most efficient way to use that. One of the challenges that we've had, as we've expressed in other presentations, is no means or volume of conservation is going to help this situation with a regional basis. It'll help us locally, and it'll help us with our water demands locally. But I think with the climate change numbers that we've seen and everything that's happening on the basin, it's almost inevitable that we'll go into further stages of drought. We put some guidance out or some memo or something out as the Department of Interior put out their last declaration of a two-way. Internally, we had hoped they went farther. As Cindy said at the beginning of her presentation, we don't think the stage 2A cuts will do enough to hold us off from going to a stage 3. We kind of hope that the Department of Interior then steps in and moves us there quicker. And at that point in time, then we'll have to be a little bit more nimble and maybe asking our customers to do some things. And that's where we're really trying to figure out then the percentages or things that we want to achieve once we reach that stage.
And then just leading up to that, and the question was asked earlier about defining the large water users. To me, I think it makes more sense to kind of go there first. So what are some more details, or what are things that we can do, especially with the large water users, in regards to policy or
right?
I would say making them pay more than the average folks.
Right, so we're doing a couple of things, and Cindy can extrapolate of things that I've missed. So the first thing that we've done with our large user of a TSMC, we're engaging with them about water recycling and how to reduce their footprint. They've already come down significantly on their initial water estimates that they've provided to us and how to use that. A subset of that is our cooling tower program, and really identifying those large water users and the amount of water that they use to actually cool their facilities. So we have the Blue Bank program, in which we came to council before the recess to get approval for, that will then have an outreach program to then engage with those large water users and how they can convert to a technology that uses less water for their cooling systems.
Madam Chair and Councilman Garcia, the other thing I would say too is context. So when we talked about and defined that large water user, beginning at users that are 250,000 gallons per day and up, really large water, the really large water users are water users that are more than 500,000 gallons per day. Just as a point of context, the number of customers in the city of Phoenix that are in that range are probably less than 10. I mean, we're talking about, we're not talking about HOAs that overwatered their grass, which is a very big concern, but not necessarily a large water user under this policy. We're really talking about industrial users that by definition, by the type of industry that they engage in, tend to use heavier amounts of water. And so those are the kinds, you're right, those are the kinds of users that we want to target, not so much to say you can't be in Phoenix, but to evaluate where they are in Phoenix, where's the right place for locations of those types of industries, as well as things like, as Troy mentioned, recycling is a very important thing when they're talking about that much water, and how to make sure that what they are using is the most efficient way to use it.
Thank you. And Troy, you did set up my next question with the water towers and technology. So what are other technologies we can explore? And obviously, I think reclaimed water is one we've had the previous conversation. But yeah, what are other ways we can conserve the water that's already in our system?
Right. As you said, Madam Chair, Councilman Garcia, yeah, essentially what we're looking at right now is the cooling towers, and then really trying to evaluate how to put our wastewater to the best, most highest beneficial use. As you and I have had conversations, we've done a lot of looking at this over the summer, and we're hoping to come back and talk with council further about potentially of how that would happen. So our wastewater side, we have about 60 to 70 million gallons a day of wastewater that goes to beneficial use of irrigating crops and other things, but that could be eventually put back to an alternative water resource that is drought resilient. And so that's one of the things that we are interested in trying to finalize our plans here in the next few weeks.
And keep putting that picture of the Tres Rios deck, and it just keeps coming to mind what happens to that water next. So yeah, really excited about looking into what else we can do there. Last questions. We just talked about, obviously, heat. And so how do we, we have recommendations to reduce consumption on grass and landscaping, but at the same time have a tree canopy goal. And so just wondering how those two talk to each other, and how do we make sure that it's not a contradiction, but a complementary plan that we're able to do both?
Right, and Cynthia can elaborate a little bit more as well, but that's a lot of what Josh is talking about. As we go and look at these development standards, how do you balance heat island effects with water use? We think there's ways to do that with the selection of the types of plants in the vegetation that we put in, using more drought-tolerant trees and things like that to achieve the shade canopies and other things. And that's some of what we want to reach out and to try to figure out as we move forward.
Madam Chair, Councilman Garcia, one of the things that we're looking at is now that the tree and shade canopy policy is about to be updated, which it was due to be updated. I will be working with Dr. Hondala on that, because we do need to make sure that we're interfacing. There needs to be a conversation about water use and trees, and making sure that we're able to accomplish the goals that we have. But also to do it in a way that makes sure we're conscious of the water that we're using and where does that water come from. So it is a delicate balance. I mean, we're going to walk a tight line. That's one of the interesting things that I would argue none of the other cities in the western United States that rely upon Colorado River, with the possible exception of Tucson, have the same issue that Phoenix does. And that is that, in this rush, in my opinion, to ban all kinds of grass, we are losing a conversation about heat mitigation. And while that might not be an issue in Denver or Los Angeles, it is an issue in Phoenix, and we have to address it in a way that's balanced. And so that's something that we're going to be working on in the future, but it is a delicate tightrope we're going to walk.
All right, thank you. And then Josh, for you, with annexations, especially with places that are outside of our service area, what is there consideration as we do that, or how do we put this plan for water use in those areas?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, it's a great question, and as we look at annexation requests, we do so in partnership with our Water Services Department. And so, I'll probably let Troy speak to the kinds of considerations that we're employing now when we're evaluating annexation requests and how that may change moving forward.
Right, so some of the things that we are contemplating and having the discussions about are parcels that are located within our service territory, that are within our existing planning territory. We've always planned to be a part of the city of Phoenix. There's a lot of county islands that are stranded within the city boundaries. But then really going out and talking with the development community, as Josh pointed out, really going out and trying to get a sense of should Phoenix be annexing outside of our boundaries. And some of the concerns that we have is the water resources associated with doing those things, and what are the policies, and trying to get direction from council eventually of what we should be doing when we're under declarations of drought as it relates to annexations. But we do see kind of two kind of buckets of those properties located within the service territory, which we've defined, and then what we've been planning to serve, and then those properties that are potentially outside of that.
And then my last comment, I promise, Chairwoman. Even though I think, with the first graph, we look like we're safe, right? We've got the 58% coming from salt and verde, and we have some water stored. I think we talked about it. Our region is not in the same location, in the same place. And I don't think that if they go into a crisis level that we're just going to let them dry out. And so I do think there's a responsibility there, obviously, as the biggest city in the area. And so just really want to come back to encouraging us to try to be innovative, to try to figure out ways of conserving what's already there, and obviously reusing what we have, and continuing to be a leader. So thank you all for your work, and excited to listen to those ideas and hopefully push some policies to get some of that done.
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. Councilwoman Ansari?
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you all so much for your work on this. I think from all of those questions and answers, really encouraging, especially to hear, Cynthia, that you're working so closely with Dr. Hongila and looking at that heat and water intersection, and also on the development piece. I think those standards are incredibly important. I know a couple months ago when we had that discussion about the EPA water sense and the fact that we were hoping, and now that we're hoping to make that the standard, I think that's great. I'm hoping we can do that this year. But obviously that has the most effect on new development. So I'm wondering what we can do to help incentivize residents and employers with, who already have our big water users, and how we can work on that.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari, some of the conservation programs that we launched in Phase 1 and Phase 2 are designed to help with that. As mentioned in the presentation, the HOA efficiency checkup is one of them. We also are working toward propping up a rebate program for toilet retrofits.
Okay.
We've had one for many years for low-income residents, but we've never had one for people who are not low-income residents. It's more in the nature of a rebate. And so that's something that we're looking at as well. We are going to be looking closely at how we can look at grass issues, in especially non-functional turf, and maybe there's some places that we can look toward that. But what we've been working on right now is the 12 recommendations that the council approved after the ad hoc, and trying to get those implemented first. So there are several programs in there, as well as the cooling tower program,
right,
that we're working toward.
Okay.
And then education.
Right. Okay, and I know that, I guess related to that, I know the Inflation Reduction Act has some significant funding for drought resiliency as well. Do we have many details on what's in there and how we can leverage those for Phoenix?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari. So we're evaluating those. Essentially what we've done is applied for a few water conservation programs to help get funding. Some of the ones we were trying to do was through direct appropriation that didn't quite work out. But yes, we're evaluating those and trying to figure out what the best way to get funding to help expand those programs.
Okay, great. That's it for my questions. I think with the last conversation and this one, just thinking it all through, I feel an incredible sense of urgency around climate and water issues. I know you all do as well. But I just hope that, with this being the very beginning of this year's council session, I really think this year we need to go above and beyond and be as transformative as possible. I know, there's always a little bit of a push and pull between incremental action and more exponential change, but I think in this regard, we're already so far behind. We're already feeling the impacts of the climate crisis and water issues so severely that I hope we can really be bold and not feel that we need to move. We just can't work on 2 to 5, 10-year timelines. We have to work this year. So Thank you for working with a sense of urgency, and I look forward to getting as much done this year as possible when it comes to climate and water issues. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Ansari, if I could add part of what we are talking about and proposing here as it relates to this new development, and drought policy is coming back with a small policy paper and resolutions that are going to direct staff, once council would approve those, to look at specific areas and bring information forward that would either implement that via education, code changes, all those types of items. But what we are targeting, because of the sense of urgency, is getting that policy back to council here in the next few months so that it can be adopted, and it will establish a process and the items that we're going to be working on with stakeholder input through direct, processes to evaluate city code, requirements as it relates to plumbing, landscape, those types of issues, working with, Community Economic Development Department and Economic Development folks as we're talking about the large water policy user. But we are on a fast track to bring the overall policy back to you guys for input and hopefully council adoption, and then that will really lay out that framework of what to address from there.
Councilwoman Stark?
Alan, you read my mind. I wanted to know what the next action items were, so thank you, and thanks staff for all you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add, I think what you said is important, Alan, but I would just take it a step further in terms of having some sort of policy meeting, some sort of panel discussion with other folks in the city of Phoenix that are working on water conservation. Maybe sometimes we all don't agree on everything, but I think it's important to bring all those folks together. We are the largest city here in Phoenix, and I think we do have to lead and we do have to come out at front, but I do think that we have to bring everyone else with us. There's a lot of different stakeholders that have been working on this for a very long time, and I think that we have to bring them to the table, and we need to listen to what they also have to say in terms of how is it that it becomes a we problem and not just a city of Phoenix problem, and how is it that we're all working together on this. And I couldn't agree more in terms of input from our different constituents, and how do we educate people. I think education is key, and how do we educate people, and how do we get people to understand the issues that are in front of us. And we have a lot of work to do on that front. And I know that for myself, I'm more than happy to get out there and talk to people in my district in terms of how do we get people to understand this, and how do we bring different people to the table. So I think before we bring anything else forward, I do believe those discussions are important, because it'd be nice for it to be a plan that we're doing as a collective, more than just the city council in the city of Phoenix. So I would just recommend that we put some urgency in terms of putting that panel discussion together and bring all these different stakeholders to the table together with all of us as we're trying to figure this out, and how do we continue to support all of you with all of the hard work that you guys are doing. And yes, figuring out from the top to the bottom, I think it's important. And how do we do that, and how do we continue to really spread the love when it comes to holding people accountable in terms of how do we conserve more water. And with that, thank you guys so much for all of your hard work. And I know this is not an easy task, but I know that we'll get it done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we are going to go back and give another opportunity for public comment. Do we have anyone on the line? Okay, thank you for that. And with that, are there any future items that any of my colleagues would like to add for the agenda? Yes, Councilwoman.
Maybe in November or December we could get an update on the homeless plan.
Okay. Great, thank you. Anyone else? Great, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.
programs and career navigation services came together to develop a unique approach to supporting students in industry. Community colleges have innovated and revolutionized over the past couple years to develop unique